so I just want to take 2 minutes or go through a couple slides just to review where we were ending up last time. We started talking about corruption. We defined corruption. There's this commonly used definition of corruption as the abuse of public office for private gain, and there's really a very wide range of activities that you might think would fit this definition. And there's also some relativity here. Certain activities that seem obviously corrupt in one setting may seem totally normal in another setting. So campaign contributions in the U.S., for instance, there's a lot of countries that for which those sorts of activities would be legal, but they're perfectly legal in the U.S. And but we discussed this issue of just how difficult it often is to measure corruption because the activities that we're interested in are illegal and no one's reporting them on official data sets. So we have to be creative to think of ways of measuring them. And then the example we got to, then we started talking about these main research questions again, just to very quickly review. What sort of effect might corruption have on economic and political development? How widespread is corruption? And what could be done to control it? And the case we started getting into at the end of class last time was this case not in an African setting, in Colombia, of the mayor of Bogota, and how he used a variety of different approaches to try to change what he considered a culture of rule-breaking behavior, criminality, and corruption, and really how he used a range of creative approaches, some of which were very theatrical, like hiring mimes to walk the streets and embarrass people who were jaywalking or running red lights, and some of which were more standard law and order type programs. And we kind of ended up with this question about how difficult it might be to disentangle the effects of these different types of interventions. And we're going to talk more about that today. But before we do so, I actually wanted to just get people's view and just do a very quick question on this. We spent 10 minutes last time. We talked about the case of Sierra Leone. We talked about Colombia. And this issue of when you're thinking about a very specific case, like the change in criminality in Bogota in the 1990s, what do you think not really knowing much about the setting probably, what do you think is most likely or most plausibly behind the big drop in crime rates? Was it all of these innovative civic culture type actions that Mokus took? Was it the legal enforcement reforms? Was it most likely something else entirely, like the end of the drug wars or economic turnarounds? Or is it something else entirely? I just want to get people's kind of sense of which of these just seems more plausibly causal. Okay, so it's pretty interesting, actually. You guys are pretty evenly split, with a lot of people thinking maybe the sort of cultural interventions are important, an equal number of thinking legal enforcement is important, but many of you actually pointing towards much broader factors as driving the drop in criminality. So that's very interesting. I of course don't have an answer to this question, but it's interesting to see that views are quite dispersed on this issue. So let's get into this issue of trying to disentangle, say, cultural norms from enforcement, and we'll talk about a case that I've worked on that is an attempt to disentangle these things. Disentangling the causal effects of different factors is sometimes what's called the identification problem in econometrics, really trying to pin down causal links. So it's closely related to some of the identification approaches we've talked about so far in this course. And the way to think about this problem in terms of, say, omitted variables is to ask yourself the following question. Imagine we find a correlation between, say, corruption, other forms of rule-breaking, criminality. We find a correlation between those and the strength of the legal enforcement mechanisms put in place to curb those actions. So imagine if we find that places that have really great laws that crack down on corruption, that have a lot of competent police force, investigative activity, etc., those places tend to have very little corruption. How should we interpret that relationship? One way to interpret it is, well, maybe these legal efforts have paid off, and they're the reason why there's so little corruption in certain societies. But there's a very important omitted variable, and in this case, an omitted variable we have in mind is maybe there are different cultural norms or social norms regarding corruption in places with strong legal enforcement versus places with weak legal enforcement. In other words, a lot of other things may differ between societies that invest a lot of resources in containing certain activities versus other societies. So you can think of culture here as the omitted variable. So again, this is just thinking of this relationship in terms of the regression equations we've done, we've looked at before. So you might say, well, how have we dealt with problems of identification before? We've thought of different types of experiments or regression discontinuity designs, or all the IVs, these other these various methodological approaches for getting at causality. How can we do experiments or create research designs when it comes to culture? That seems like a very challenging thing to do. It seems a little more challenging, for instance, or a lot more challenging to bring about exogenous variation in cultural norms than it does to hand out deworming pills. So are we stuck? Is it basically impossible to get a handle on the causal effects of these things? One of the readings, and this is a chapter from the book I wrote with Ray Fissman, does, this is based on a research paper of ours, is talk about a real-world setting that is not the perfect experiment, but has certain elements, certain effectively experimental elements that can help us make progress on some of these issues. So let me just talk through what we do. What we're able to do is take advantage of the fact that there's a large population of diplomats from around the world that all live in New York City. We ended up getting data from New York City. Now, how does that help us? Well, it helps us because those diplomats face a very different legal enforcement environment than the rest of us. And in particular, it's well known that diplomats serving abroad have diplomatic immunity. And diplomatic immunity means people can break the rules, like parking rules in our case, and basically get away with it. And let me explain in a little more detail what that means. But the reason that this helps us is if we think in general, rule-breaking behavior by public servants, like the international diplomats that we study, people are constrained by rules and norms. Diplomats, in a setting with diplomatic immunity, basically have much weaker legal enforcement, if any legal enforcement, relative to the rest of us. So we have what's sort of like a quasi-experimental setting in which people are only going to be constrained by norms or psychological costs from rule breaking, if you want to think of things in terms of social norms, but not by legal enforcement. And that's the setting we're able to take advantage of. So why does that help us? Well, we've got lots of data. There's actually data on thousands of diplomats from 149 countries. They're all working in the same environment in Midtown Manhattan. So we control for other elements of the setting. This is also very nice because when we look at rule breaking or corruption or criminality in different parts of the world, lots of things differ in different parts of the world, economic conditions, other things. Here we have, basically comfortably paid diplomats all in one part of Manhattan, and the act of parking illegally and not paying your parking tickets because you are a diplomat actually seems to fit the definition of corruption pretty well. So that is abusing a public office for private gain. So because I have the public office of being a diplomat, I can park illegally, inconvenience everybody else, but because of diplomatic immunity, I never have to pay the tickets. That basically feels like corruption. I'm abusing my public office so that I don't have to pay for parking, or because I think it's fun. Whatever the reason is why I decided to park on the sidewalk or block somebody's driveway. I grew up in the New York area, I just remember driving into Manhattan and in certain parts near the UN, just seeing the diplomatic plates double parked on narrow streets, and it generated a lot of ill will. You can imagine. Okay, so the other thing that we're very lucky and we can exploit here is it actually turns out that the city of New York was able to do something a little tricky to effectively boost the legal enforcement against diplomats who were parking illegally after 2002. So we're going to be able to see the behavior of diplomats without legal enforcement and with legal enforcement over time and see how their behavior changes. So this is an interesting real-world setting that may help us understand the role of norms versus enforcement in combating corruption. So a little bit more diplomatic immunity. There's a very long history of diplomatic immunity. Actually, goes back centuries, and there's good reason for having diplomatic immunity. There's a fear that diplomats could be caught in the crossfire if there are bad relations between countries, or diplomats could be held hostage. And so a mutual sort of reciprocal norm of immunity is really meant to be a way to prevent that kind of abuse of diplomatic staff and government staff who are living abroad. And in reality, if you actually look at real-world cases, diplomats get away in general with a lot more than parking tickets. I mean, there are many cases of diplomats who commit murders and other kinds of violent crimes who are just expelled and sent back to their home country. They're very rarely prosecuted, even for very serious crimes. So it's a very strong norm, and the fact that it sort of protects diplomats on all sides is probably what leads to its enforcement. Because if, say, the U.S. were to crack down on the diplomats of a certain country that had committed a crime, the fear would be that U.S. diplomats would then be punished for something. And so it's like you have the other country has your diplomats as hostages, basically, in this kind of deal. Of course, it's possible for the home government to waive immunity, but they typically don't do that. So what ends up happening is in countries around the world, in cities around the world, big world capitals and diplomatic centers, diplomatic parking has been reported to be a major problem. And you can pull articles on many different cities. And New York, because of the presence of the UN, is one place where this is widely seen has historically been seen as a big problem. Okay, so why does it help us out? So a little graph here is going to help illustrate why the setting of these diplomats in New York City are going to help us solve some problems. So imagine we observe two types of countries. I'm using slightly value-laden language here, but let's just go for it. Let's imagine there are certain countries where government officials tend to be relatively non-corrupt, and others where there's widespread evidence that there's tremendous amounts of bureaucratic corruption and government corruption. And imagine that when we compare these two countries, we find out, or these two sets of countries, we find out that the places where there's lots of corruption tend to both have weak legal enforcement, but also cultural norms that don't seem to punish corrupt behavior or rule-breaking much. So if there's many internationally comparable surveys of social attitudes, and so imagine these countries, if you ask people, look, is it wrong for someone to take a small bribe? They kind of, most respond and say, well, it's okay, it's not really that big a deal. But in these other countries, there's very strong legal enforcement against rule-breaking and criminality, and people's attitudes are just very strongly against that kind of behavior. So there are these two kinds of countries, and the identification problem comes from the fact that a couple of things differ between these countries: legal enforcement and culture. So just to make things concrete, and at the risk of being too specific, let's just imagine that we compare Norway and Nigeria. So if you actually look in the rankings of the world's most corrupt countries from Transparency International, lots of other surveys, etc., Nigeria regularly comes in as one of the most corrupt countries in the world. Nigerians write about the culture of corruption in the country, from people who work in government from sort of very low levels all the way up to high-level ministers report on massive amounts of graft and theft, bribery, etc. So Nigeria is a country that's famous for public officials abusing their office for private gain. To fit the definition, to the extent that untold tens of billions of dollars of oil money have been stolen through the years from public coffers. In contrast, think of Norway. I've chosen Norway because Norway is also a major oil producer. And starts with the letter N, so lots of major similarities. But it has very strong legal enforcement. In all kinds of surveys you run, Norwegians, express tremendous rigidity in terms of, being opposed to rule breaking and corruption, etc. And oil wealth, again, going all the way to the very top, has been very well managed. There's a very famous state fund that manages oil wealth and spends it on public projects, and etc. You're basically saving the country's oil wealth for a rainy day. Just incredibly well managed public resources. So these seem to be polar opposite cases. Now, if we were going to try to figure out why Norway is less corrupt than Nigeria, there's no shortage of possible explanations. Maybe it's those surveys that talk about public attitudes. Maybe that's the key thing. Maybe it's the legal enforcement. Maybe it's just the degree of development. Maybe there's maybe being very rich allows you to indulge in the luxury of not being corrupt. Maybe when you're very poor, government officials are poor and actually finding it hard to make ends meet. Being corrupt is not at all an unreasonable strategy for them individually, etc. So we have very different outcomes. But this makes it hard to figure out what is going on. So what's nice about the diplomatic case in New York City is now all of a sudden the Norwegian diplomats are over here. They're now acting in a setting where they can park on the street illegally and not pay their tickets. There's no legal enforcement. And the question is, do they? So when the Norwegian and Nigerian diplomats get the chance to break the rules, which of them breaks the rules? The other sort of part of the natural experiment that's nice is after 2002, once there's high legal enforcement, now we get to observe Nigerian officials, these Nigerian diplomats, in a setting where there is very strong enforcement when they break the rules, and we see if their behavior changes. So we're actually able to observe government officials from 149 different countries operating under different degrees of legal enforcement, and we see whether without legal enforcement, in the first case, in this case, we see big differences in the behavior of these government officials. Okay, let me pause for a second and see if there's any questions. People always ask, what about the US diplomats? The issue is since the UN is in the US, there's no diplomatic immunity for the US diplomats, so this basically doesn't hold for US diplomats. So we can't get the comparable data, but there is a sort of funny side case, and this is something that's about 10 years old now, but in London about a decade ago they introduced a congestion charge, they called it, basically a charge to drive a private vehicle into central London, and the attempt was to make people pay for congesting one of the world's great cities, and sort of that payment could help capture the social cost of pollution and other things and congestion from driving to central London. And the diplomats from a number of countries refused to pay the congestion charge. They had like a little one of those like fast track things, and you're supposed to sort of pay when you drove into central London. But diplomats refused, and they have diplomatic immunity, so there's nothing you can do about it. But not all countries' diplomats refused. Only certain countries' diplomats, and the number one country that racked up the most unpaid congestion charges was the U.S. And so anyway, you can draw whatever conclusion you want from that. So explain more of your thinking. You're saying the level of development or education could matter? How would it? Yeah. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, potentially, that's right. So there's a lot of things that may differ between Nigeria and Norway. The level of education could matter, a range of other things. I would say in the case of these specific diplomats, it turns out diplomats from around the world all tend to be quite well educated. They all tend to be quite well off. So it's another advantage of looking at diplomats is to say, look, the Nigerian diplomats at the UN are very well educated, with college degrees, etc. So, again, by looking at diplomats, we're looking at a relatively homogeneous group of people, and maybe that helps dampen some of the effects that you mentioned. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, potentially. So I'll show you some maps, and we can talk about that, but parking in New York is expensive. It turns out the UN gives a number of slots at the UN to the diplomats from different countries based on the size of their delegation, so that helps to deal with at least some of the problems, but we'll come back to it, and that would be a partial explanation for some of the patterns we would find. Of course, New Yorkers use the subway all the time too, and it's not that hard to take a subway ride. I think that would be one answer, but I'll come back to that issue, because there are official free spots you get as a diplomat at the UN. I'm going to show you a map to show you that a lot of the violations are occurring down in Greenwich Village and on the Upper West Side, and sort of like where people go to party but not to work. Yeah. Did you have your hand up?
Okay.
Yeah.
I was thinking that that seems very local because it's all about diplomats. I
Yeah.
can compare with our other the Treasury.
Yeah. I think that's a good point. Yeah, to the extent that they're very different than other government officials, it may or may not generalize, but they're a kind of type of government official, and they may be similar, they may be different. But it's true that it's hard to know how far to generalize it. Yeah, that's a good point. In the back, yeah.
I also wonder about using parking tickets as a proxy for parking.
Yeah.
Because there are different levels of parking. There's requiring parking ticket versus doesn't.
Yep. That's right. So maybe, given the amounts here, a parking ticket is $80 or something, maybe these are sort of like smaller, the equivalent of smaller medium bribes. So maybe this reflects more on low-level petty corruption rather than massive embezzlement. I think this would be a closer analog to that kind of behavior. I think that's right. Okay, so how did we get this data? We came up with the idea for this project, and my co-author, Ray Fissman at Columbia, was in New York, so he reached out to the New York Parking Authority, and it turned out they were very eager to give us data. They really wanted it. Like, sure, out these guys, just go for it. So we actually never made public the names of the individual diplomats, but we do present results by country. So they gave us the data for, I think, 97 to 2005. We got the data in like 2005, something like that. Really detailed data, and we combined it with some other data. So we got the UN's official called Blue Book listing of all the members of UN missions with diplomatic immunity. So we got that data, and that gives us the number of diplomats per country. So that was important because we want to normalize the number of parking tickets by the number of diplomats, basically, who are there. We also have the number of registered vehicles. So and we had that for 1 year, but apparently that's quite stable because the size of the missions is pretty stable. So we had sort of numbers to normalize the number of violations. And the New York City folks gave us basically their raw spreadsheet, just like an Excel spreadsheet with all the violations of diplomats, the registrant, the license plate number, everything, the time and date of violation, the type of violation, location, and then the country. And there's this fine, penalty, and total amount. Because if you don't pay the initial fine, there's an additional penalty. And typically people that don't pay the fine also don't pay the penalty, so it sort of accumulates. But there's many, many millions of dollars of unpaid parking tickets every year during this period in New York City. And this is actually what the data looks like. So sorry, this is literally just the first page of the spreadsheet. And we put X's where there are private diplomats' names to protect their privacy. And this is just like one day. This was just the first day in 1997 the parking folks in New York started digitizing their data. Until then they just had paper tickets or something. And part of the reason they started digitizing was precisely because the diplomatic parking problem was becoming such a big local political issue. So Rudy Giuliani was the mayor of New York at this time, and he was sort of trying to put pressure on the diplomats. He wanted to collect data to publicize just how bad the problem was. So they started collecting this data, and you can see you have the date there, the time, the description. So you have some double parking, you have some expired meters. You have a lot of people kind of standing in some sort of truck loading zone or other zones, just like blocking driveways, and a very wide range of countries represented here. This was really just the first page of the spreadsheet, so not anywhere to, we didn't pick these systematically. The one person in particular, this is just a figure from the book, caught our attention. There was one diplomat who committed the most violations. He was from Kuwait, and we call him Ambassador X. And he was just prolific. He personally got hundreds of parking tickets per year. So he was getting in many days just multiple parking. He never even bothered. This guy was so bad that even if there was an open spot that was legal, he would never take it. I mean, why? What's the point? He wouldn't want to take somebody else's spot when he could park on the sidewalk. So you can actually see he was definitely parking near the UN. If you see the UN Plaza blow up, there are a lot of violations right near the UN, and also kind of near the Midtown Tunnel, which isn't too far away. But you see his violations are wide-ranging. So this is when he went out basically in Greenwich Village and some other places. So and there are violations here, 10 at night, 11 at night. So he. This was not just all work-related. So I think pictures like this, if we could produce for a lot of countries, help at least partially deal with the issue that was raised before. One of the things we did is we said, let's just look at violations outside of work hours, outside of 9 to 5 or 8 to 6, Monday to Friday, and you still find the same pattern of violations sort of outside of work hours in terms of countries. And we did a bunch of other checks. So some of it could be work-related, but a lot of it is just people parking wherever they want, whenever they want. So this guy really set the standard. And so I wanted to ask a question here. Let me just do another clicker question, which is to say, I'm going to be looking at these from the point of view of African development. So on the next slide, I'm going to show you a slide with the top violators, the countries that have the most unpaid parking tickets. And I want to get your guys' guess here before you've seen the data. Out of the 18 countries, just because that's what's on the slide, the 18 countries with the most violations per diplomat, how many do you think are in sub-Saharan Africa? And then we'll talk about the implications of this. Okay, so you guys are pretty evenly spread. A lot of 8s and 11s, some more, and some less. Actually, the right answer is 11. 11 out of 18. So this is just a list, and I'm going to show you the data so you can look for other countries in a minute. Kuwait comes in on top, really powered by their star, Ambassador X. Without Ambassador X, Kuwait doesn't look great, but I mean, he was really the highlight. We actually know exactly when he goes on vacation because it goes from like 3 violations a day to no violations in the month of August in a given year. It's like, so I hope there's no like Kuwaiti diplomats in the room. So there we are, violations per diplomat. So I just want to give you a sense of the numbers. So Kuwait leads the way. Let's go to